When she begins to drift away, when the warmth that once wrapped around your connection starts to cool into a polite distance, most men panic. They text more, they call more, they beg for reassurance. They look for hidden meanings in every glance and every pause. They clutch at the disappearing threads of her attention, and in doing so, they tighten the noose around their own neck. Nietzsche warned of this impulse, not in the language of modern dating, but in the deeper, more primal vocabulary of human will. He understood that all relationships, romantic or otherwise, are governed not by sentiment alone, but by an invisible struggle for power, for positioning, for the preservation of one's inner sovereignty. The moment she pulls away, you are standing at the precipice of that struggle. Your reaction in those first moments will either elevate you to a higher plane in her eyes or bury you forever in the graveyard of her forgotten admirers. The promise here is brutal but pure. If you learn to counter not with neediness, but with power, if you can transform her withdrawal into the stage upon which your strength is displayed, you can flip her emotional trajectory entirely. You can make her pull away only to realize she has created the very conditions to become addicted to you. Nietzsche's thesis for moments like this is ruthless clarity. Life favors those who can bear the tension of uncertainty without breaking. When she withdraws, she is not only protecting her independence or testing the boundaries, she is, consciously or not, gauging your ability to stand alone. In the romantic arena, the man who can remain unshaken, who can project abundance instead of scarcity, becomes the rare figure she cannot control. And what cannot be controlled becomes irresistibly fascinating. This is the psychological counterattack, to turn her retreat into an arena for your dominance, not by chasing, but by standing so immovably in your own frame that she feels the gravity pull her back in. Scenario 1 begins at what seems like a harmless moment. She's been slower to reply to your messages. Her laughter during your last conversation felt forced, and when you suggested meeting up, she answered with a vague, maybe, followed by a silence that lasted 2 days. The change is subtle but undeniable. The hidden test here is ancient. It springs from the evolutionary need to sort men into categories: those who can command value without constant validation, and those who crumble when it is withheld. She is not consciously thinking in Darwinian terms, but her nervous system is. This withdrawal is a simulation of loss. It's her mind asking, if I stop feeding him attention, will he still stand as a man? Or will he become a child begging for his toy back? It's also a check against overinvestment. By pulling back, she's seeing if you will rush forward to fill the gap, revealing yourself as more invested than she is, which would grant her the higher ground in the dynamic. That higher ground is intoxicating to hold, but it is equally intoxicating for her when you refuse to hand it over. The smell in the air is faintly metallic, the way tension always smells before something cracks. In her mind, this moment is a sorting hat. You will be sorted into the forgettable majority or the unforgettable anomaly. The weak male response in this situation is as predictable as the sunrise. He notices her pulling away and immediately decides he must do something, anything, to restore her warmth. His texts double in length, his emojis multiply, his invitations become more frequent and more desperate. If she posts on social media, he's the first to like, the first to comment, the first to slide into her direct messages with some feeble attempt at humor or nostalgia. In his mind, this is showing care. In her mind, this is the sound of armor breaking. The moment he escalates his pursuit in response to her withdrawal, she reads it as confirmation that her presence is his oxygen. And when your oxygen supply depends on someone else, you've already declared them the master of your life. Nietzsche would call this the morality of the slave, the instinct to define oneself in reaction to another, to move not from one's own will, but in anxious response to the will of the other. This collapse is subtle but lethal. She no longer sees a man with internal stability, but a man who rearranges his emotions and behavior around hers. The mystery evaporates. The polarity dissolves, and with it, the tension that drives attraction. Her desire doesn't just cool, it hardens into a polite, almost maternal pity. The power response, in Nietzschean terms, is to meet her withdrawal with a withdrawal of your own, but not from anger or wounded pride. You pull back as a man retreating into his own fortress, a place from which he rules his life. Your messages don't disappear entirely, but they become shorter, sharper, infused with an economy of attention. You redirect your energy into your own pursuits, social, physical, creative, not as a performance, but as a genuine expansion of your world beyond her. This is the counterattack. By not chasing, you deprive her of the confirmation she was seeking that she controls the tempo of your emotions. Instead, you signal that your world is already full, that you are not seeking a center to orbit, because you are the center. In practical terms, this might mean you respond to her delayed reply with your own delayed reply, but without passive aggression, only the easy, unbothered tone of someone whose time is in demand. Nietzsche would call this the will to power expressed in restraint, the ability to assert dominance not through noise, but through unshakable self-containment. This is not playing hard to get. It is being hard to get because your value is not up for negotiation. The shift in her perception begins as confusion. She expected you to lean in when she leaned out. Instead, you've leaned back just enough to create a gap she did not anticipate. That gap becomes a mirror, forcing her to see herself not as the chooser, but as someone now at risk of being unchosen. Intrigue floods in where certainty once lived. Her mind begins replaying moments, looking for signs she missed. Was he always this self-contained? Has he found someone else? Is he genuinely indifferent, or is this just a phase? Over time, this confusion transforms into a renewed sense of pursuit. She may initiate contact more often, inject warmth back into her tone, or suggest plans without your prompting. The underlying change is profound. You have shifted the center of gravity. She is no longer the sun around which you orbit. You have become the star she must navigate by. This is Nietzsche's ultimate victory in the romantic realm, not to control her, but to control yourself so completely that she cannot help but be drawn back into your orbit. Scenario 2 unfolds not during a lull in conversation, but during what appears to be a small conflict. You suggest a plan for the weekend, something you've been looking forward to, and she responds with a vague, dismissive comment about maybe doing something with her friends instead. Her tone is casual, but there's a sharpened edge beneath it, like she's waiting to see how you'll react. This is another form of pulling away, but cloaked in the language of independence and preference. The hidden test here is whether you can remain unshaken when your desires are deprioritized. Evolutionary psychology explains this as a form of boundary and dominance testing. In pair bonding and courtship, the one who frames the shared reality tends to hold more influence. By subtly rejecting your plan, she is not only expressing her agency, but probing whether you will collapse into compliance or assert your own frame without aggression. Her nervous system is asking, does he maintain his vision when challenged, or does he abandon it the moment I resist? The setting matters here. The restaurant's lighting is low. A hum of conversation wraps around you, and the air smells faintly of citrus from the drink in your hand. You re-watching her eyes, not just her words, and you can see the glimmer of anticipation for your next move. This is not about the weekend plan. This is about whether you bend. The weak male response here is to immediately backpedal. He chuckles awkwardly, says, "Yeah, totally, no problem," and waves off the plan he was excited about, perhaps even offering to join her and her friends, or suggesting something else entirely to make her more comfortable. In his mind, he is showing flexibility and respect for her choices. In her mind, he has just signaled that his desires are conditional on her approval, and therefore carry no real weight. Nietzsche would see in this the essence of reactive existence, a man whose will is always subordinate to the will of others. This collapse does more than just diminish attraction. It alters her perception of him as a leader in the relationship. If he cannot hold his ground in small matters, how could he be trusted to hold it in larger ones? The moment he abandons his position without negotiation, he confirms that she can shift his center at will. This erodes the polarity that draws her to him in the first place, replacing it with a dynamic where she becomes the unchallenged architect of their shared reality. The energy becomes maternal rather than magnetic. The power response in this moment is to acknowledge her statement without surrendering your position. You don't need to force the plan or guilt her for having other priorities, but you also don't erase her own. You can say something as simple as, "All right, we'll make it another time," and then shift the conversation to something else, maintaining a relaxed tone and steady eye contact. The subcommunication here is critical. You're signaling that you are unaffected by her resistance, that you have a life and momentum of your own, and that while you're open to connection, you do not hinge your happiness on her participation. Nietzsche would describe this as the active man sees as a will to power retaining the ability to shape reality without being thrown into despair or supplication when it is not immediately validated. This kind of frame control is rare because it is not about verbal sparring or dominance displays. It is about living in such a way that no single interaction has the power to define you. She may not agree to your plan, but she will sense that your world continues to spin with or without her in that moment. The shift in her perception begins with an almost imperceptible flicker in her expression. She may expect irritation or a pleading adjustment to accommodate her, but instead she finds herself facing a man who stands calmly in his position without turning it into a contest. This lack of overreaction can be disarming. She has not gained the leverage she anticipated, and instead she is confronted with the reality that you are not a man easily maneuvered. Over the following days or weeks, this moment will replay in her mind, not because of the specifics of the plan, but because of what it revealed. Your desires are real, they have weight, and they are not immediately up for negotiation. The result is a subtle rebalancing of respect. Even if she still spends that weekend with her friends, the seed of curiosity is planted. She will wonder what else in your life operates on these terms. What other parts of you are governed by this unshakable self-possession? This is where desire begins to ferment, not in your compliance, but in your resistance. Nietzsche would remind us that strength often speaks most clearly through silence and steadiness, and that this kind of strength is the foundation upon which enduring attraction is built. Scenario 3 erupts not in subtle tones or casual tests, but in the heat of an emotional spike. You notice she's been posting flirtatious photos online, more revealing, more suggestive than usual, and the captions carry an edge of provocation. Perhaps you've even seen her commenting back and forth with another man in a way that seems designed to catch your attention. This is not accidental. This is a withdrawal disguised as display, a shifting of her energy toward the outside world to watch how you react. The hidden test here is primal. She is measuring your stability under perceived threat. In evolutionary terms, this is a simulation of competition. If another male's presence can destabilize you, you are signaling a lack of dominance and scarcity mindset. Her unconscious is watching to see whether you become territorial in a way that reveals weakness, or whether you maintain the composure of a man who knows his own value cannot be undermined by surface provocations. The sensory atmosphere of this test is almost cinematic, you staring at your phone in dim evening light. The faint hum of traffic outside, the glow of her curated image radiating from the screen like a challenge. Her nervous system is pushing a question into the open. Can you hold the throne without scrambling to prove you own it? The weak male response is to leap straight into confrontation, either in the form of jealousy-laced interrogation or passive-aggressive sulking. He sends texts demanding explanations. Why would you post that? Or, who's that guy? He frames his questions as concern, but the subtext bleeds insecurity. In doing so, He reveals that her external validation sources directly threaten his sense of worth. Nietzsche would call this the reactive man. His identity is so tied to her actions that a change in her behavior unravels his center. The problem isn't that he notices the provocation. It's that he interprets it as a loss of status and feels the need to reclaim it through pressure and control. This kind of reaction is a self-inflicted wound. By chasing after her digital performance, he confirms that his attention is tethered to her approval, instead of appearing as the sovereign figure who commands loyalty through his essence. He appears as the insecure warden of a crumbling domain. Each defensive message chips away at the aura of stability he once projected, replacing it with the jittery energy of someone fighting for scraps of attention. The power response is to treat her provocation as a neutral event, something neither ignored nor obsessed over. You don't comment on the posts, don't ask about the man, don't signal any shift in your energy. Instead, you remain consistent in your engagement, maintaining the same tone and rhythm you've always had, while visibly channeling your energy into your own pursuits. If you interact at all, it's in a light, unbothered way that suggests you see the posts as part of her world, not the foundation of yours. This is the Nietzschean will to power expressed in its most elegant form, the refusal to be thrown off course by the unpredictable motions of another's will. You do not play the game of jealousy, because that game begins with the assumption that you are competing for something scarce. Instead, you embody the man who is never in competition because his value exists outside the realm of comparison. She may expect your reaction to validate her power over you, but your restraint sends a sharper message. Her provocations do not govern your behavior. Your throne is internal, unassailable. The shift in her perception when faced with this kind of response is a blend of frustration and fascination. Frustration because her attempt to stir you has failed to penetrate your frame. Fascination because she begins to suspect your center is deeper than she thought. Over time, this kind of unshakable composure forces her to reevaluate the leverage she has in the dynamic. She may even escalate her provocations in an attempt to break the seal, but each failed attempt reinforces your image as a man who cannot be easily moved. This doesn't diminish attraction, it intensifies it. In the long-term arc, she begins to feel the magnetic pull of someone whose attention is never earned through drama, but through sustained value alignment. She senses that if she wants to hold your focus, she must elevate herself, not manipulate you. Nietzsche would argue that such a dynamic transforms the relationship from one of reactive tug-of-war to one where both parties rise in stature, but only if the man remains vigilant in guarding his sovereignty. Your calm in the face of her public display becomes the very thing that makes her want to return to you in private. Scenario 4 takes place in the quiet tone of serious conversation, rather than the spike of provocation. She sits across from you, her voice measured, her gaze soft but deliberate, and she says something like, "I just think I need some space right now to focus on myself." There's no fight in her tone, no obvious hostility, just an air of finality wrapped in the language of personal growth. This is one of the most psychologically dangerous forms of pulling away because it wears the mask of reasonableness. The hidden test here is whether you can face a declaration of emotional distance without scrambling to close it. Evolutionarily, this moment speaks to the deepest anxieties in human attachment. Will you survive without the tribe? Can you withstand exile without losing the will to act? For her, this is a probe into whether your selfhood is independent or dependent, whether you exist in full form without her constant affirmation. The environment makes it sharper, the late afternoon light cutting across the table, the faint aroma of coffee in the air, her eyes searching yours, not only for your answer, but for your essence in that answer. It is not just what you say, it's whether you can remain rooted while the ground beneath you shifts. The weak male response is to plead. His words spill quickly, trying to patch the gap. "But we've been so good together." Or, "What did I do wrong?" He might offer to change parts of himself, to adjust his schedule, to step back just enough to keep her, as if negotiating a hostage release. Nietzsche would see in this the tragedy of the man who lives reactively, the man whose worth is bound up entirely in external validation. By bargaining for her presence, he sends the message that she is the arbiter of his emotional reality, that her withdrawal defines his future. Psychologically, this triggers the same cascade as every other collapse. Her perception of his stability evaporates. The polarity that drives her attraction is inverted. She moves from seeing him as a force in her life to seeing him as an entity sustained only by her consent. Even if her stated need for space is genuine, the moment he begs, the respect erodes, because the subtext is clear. Without her, he has no anchor. The power response here is to receive her words without resistance, without an overt display of pain or urgency. You listen fully, you nod, and you say something like, "All right, do what you need to do." Your tone is calm, your posture steady, your gaze unflinching. You don't try to fill the silence with explanations or last-minute appeals. Then you move forward with your life, not as a performance to provoke her return, but because your life is already rich, already in motion. This is the Nietzschean will to power in its purest relational form, the ability to allow another's will to unfold without compromising your own. You are signaling that while you value her, you do not depend on her to maintain your identity. This isn't indifference, it's sovereignty. You are not trying to control her decision, because true power doesn't require control over others. It requires control over oneself. The unspoken message is profound. You may leave, and I will still be. In a culture where most men react to emotional distance with panic, this quiet strength becomes magnetic precisely because it is so rare. The shift in her perception begins as a momentary disorientation. She expected to feel the rush of power that comes from watching a man scramble to hold on to her, but instead, she feels the strange weight of being released without struggle. This release doesn't come from coldness. It comes from your self-possession, and it forces her to confront a truth she may not have considered. You are not bound to her through need, but through choice. Over time, this changes the dynamic entirely. The space she thought she wanted may feel different when it's granted without resistance. Instead of feeling free from pressure, she feels the absence of pursuit, and that absence begins to gnaw at her curiosity. She wonders what you're doing, who you're seeing, what kind of life continues in your world without her in it. Nietzsche would note that this kind of strength, this ability to exist fully without, leaning creates a gravitational field of its own. Many times, the very space she requested becomes the path that draws her back, not because you chased her, but because your refusal to collapse made her see you as the kind of man whose presence is never replaceable. Scenario 5 is a masterclass in subtlety. She doesn't withdraw through distance, overt avoidance, or emotional declarations. Instead, she cloaks her retreat in humor, teasing, and seemingly casual distraction. During a conversation, she might laugh off serious questions about the future, redirect topics with playful banter, or flirt in a way that seems lighthearted yet non-committal. The hidden test here is delicate. She's measuring whether you can navigate ambiguity without panic, whether you can maintain your own gravity while the world around you becomes intentionally fluid. Evolutionarily, this behavior serves to test social intelligence and emotional composure. In ancestral environments, the ability to remain unmoved and strategic in the face of capricious signals from a partner indicated both high status and strong resourcefulness. Your nervous system detects the challenge even as her smiles and laughter mask it. The scent of her perfume mingles with the cafe air. The warmth of her proximity is inviting, yet her eyes dart occasionally as if noting your reaction. Every jest is a probe, every playful evasion a mirror to see if you will bend, chase, or crumble. The weak male response to this scenario is almost instinctive. He responds with matching energy, overcommitting to the play, attempting to escalate jokes into praise, or forcing seriousness in ways that betray his anxiety. He may also attempt to read the signs, asking questions like, "Are you serious?" or "Do you mean that?" His intent is to restore clarity and regain control, but the outcome is exposure. Nietzsche would recognize this as the hallmark of reactive behavior. A man whose stability is contingent on external signals rather than internal sovereignty. The moment he overcompensates, the polarity of attraction collapses. He ceases to be the unmoved force, and instead becomes the one orbiting her whims, seeking approval for every emotional interpretation. This is subtly lethal, because she may still enjoy his company, yet her attraction diminishes at a foundational level. She begins to perceive him not as a source of magnetic energy, but as a malleable vessel whose state depends on hers. Desire shifts from curiosity to conditional expectation. The power response requires mastery of composure and playful authority. You do not compete with her humor, nor do you attempt to extract seriousness from the conversation. Instead, you anchor your own presence, responding with measured wit that signals amusement without dependency. If she teases, you return a smile or a sharp, calm retort that reinforces your frame without overinvesting. If she redirects the topic, you follow lightly while maintaining your own center of gravity, never signaling that the deviation unsettles you. Nietzschean philosophy illuminates the depth of this approach. The will to power is expressed through deliberate control over one's own attention and energy, not through controlling the actions of others. By maintaining sovereignty and ambiguity, you assert dominance through the quiet force of your internal world. She senses this instinctively. Unpredictability in her behavior no longer rattles you because you are not defined by it. The shift in her perception is profound and layered. Initially, she may feel a subtle tension, noticing that her attempts to probe or distract do not elicit the expected reactive energy. Confusion flickers across her expression, and she instinctively searches for the emotional cues she thought would guide her behavior. As this pattern repeats, she develops a mixture of fascination and respect. The ambiguity that once allowed her to manipulate or test you now serves to amplify her attraction, because it reveals that you are an independent, unassailable force. Her desire becomes complex, intertwined with admiration for your restraint and curiosity about the dimensions of your life that remain unaffected by her fluctuations. Over time, every joke, tease, or playful evasion she employs reinforces the perception that you are a man who exists beyond the ordinary pull of social expectations, whose presence is magnetic precisely because it is not contingent on her attention. Nietzsche would recognize this as the apex of romantic polarity, the man who wields power not through coercion, but through the absolute consistency of his internal sovereignty, generating desire through his very being rather than through overt conquest. Having traversed all 5 scenarios, the practical arsenal crystallizes clearly. The power responses converge into a singular principle: maintain internal sovereignty, respond with calm consistency, anchor your own life as the central force, and let her actions reveal her psychology rather than dictate yours. Each situation, whether withdrawal, subtle rejection, public provocation, the request for space, or playful evasion, demands this same essence of response. The specifics of language or timing matter less than the psychological subtext. You are the unshakable presence, the axis around which she orbits, rather than the gravitational center she controls. The philosophy of Nietzsche underpins every choice. To master the self is to command the relationship. To endure tension without collapse is to invoke fascination. And to assert the will through composure is to enact true power. The conclusion is not merely a summary. It is a reinforcement of the internalized methodology. When a woman pulls away, she is not rejecting you. She is testing, probing, and mapping the contours of your will. Each scenario illustrates that your response, more than your words, communicates value, dominance, and stability. By executing these psychological counterattacks with precision, You transform potential loss into attraction, absence into fascination, and testing into a deeper connection, founded on respect for your sovereign presence. Nietzsche's wisdom crystallizes here. Desire is drawn to strength. Fascination is generated by sovereignty, and the man who masters his own response becomes irresistible, not through manipulation, but through unassailable self-possession. This understanding primes you for every interaction to come, ensuring that the next time she drifts, she is pulled inexorably back, not by chase, but by the gravitational field of your internal power.